Buying a new house is a dream come true, a fresh start. But for the people in these stories, their dream home became a living nightmare when they discovered the secrets hidden within its walls. Every house has a history, but sometimes that history refuses to stay buried. Our first story begins with a family who found a door that was never meant to be opened. The Miller family saw the 1920s Victorian as a steal. Sure, it needed work. The air was thick with the smell of dust and forgotten decades, and the floors groaned under every footstep, but it had character. It was their 8-year-old daughter, Lily, who found it. On the second-floor landing, a section of the floral wallpaper was peeling away, revealing not plaster, but the distinct dark outline of a doorframe. There was no handle, no lock, just a solid plane of wood, painted the same color as the wall and wallpapered over. It was sealed shut, as if someone had made a conscious, determined effort to erase its existence. You don't just wallpaper over a door. This wasn't a renovation choice. It was a deliberate act of concealment. The question is, what were they hiding? After an hour of work with a crowbar, the seal broke with a sound like a sighing gasp. A wave of cold, stagnant air washed over them, carrying a strange scent. Cedar, mothballs, and something else. Sickly sweet, like old perfume. The room was small, windowless, a child's room perhaps, but lining every wall from floor to ceiling were shelves, and on the shelves were dolls, hundreds of them. They had cracked porcelain faces, faded yarn hair, and button eyes that seemed to absorb the light. And they were all positioned in the same way, facing the door, as if they had been waiting. The family's initial reaction was amusement, a weird quirk from a previous owner. But look at this photo they took that first day. Notice the doll on the far left. They decided to leave the room as it was, a strange time capsule. But Lily became fascinated. Her parents would find her sitting just inside the doorway, whispering to the dolls as if they were old friends. Then, small things started to happen. A doll from the top shelf would be found on the floor. The door to the room, which they always kept closed, would be found slightly ajar in the morning. One night, the father's baby monitor, which he used as an intercom, picked up a signal. It was faint, but unmistakable. A little girl humming a lullaby. Lily was sound asleep in her bed next to them. He recorded the sound on his phone. We've isolated the audio. It's faint, but it's there. A chilling remnant from a room that should have been silent. The final straw came when they reviewed a security camera they'd set up in the hall. At 3:14 a.m., the doll room door creaks open. Nothing comes out. But an hour later, it slowly swings shut. In the corner of the room, behind a large toy chest they hadn't moved, they found it. A small, child-sized wooden chair. And on it, a leather-bound diary. The last entry read, "My new friends are here. They watch for me now. They keep the secrets." They packed up the dolls that weekend and gave them to a historical society. But they also found one more photo from the day they opened the room. The doll with the red dress. Its head is now tilted slightly to the side, staring right at the camera. Sometimes the secrets of households aren't written in diaries. Sometimes they're recorded. Our next story is about a couple who found a box of tapes in their basement. They wish they hadn't. Mark and Sarah loved the mid-century modern aesthetic of their new home. It was a fixer-upper, especially the basement. It was a maze of cinder blocks and damp, musty air that smelled of wet earth and copper. Tucked away behind a rusted water heater, they found a heavy, military-style footlocker. It was locked. After breaking the corroded latch, they discovered it was full of old VHS tapes, each one labeled only with a date. Curiosity got the better of them. They hooked up an old VCR and put in the first tape, dated 1988. It was a normal home movie. A man, who they assumed was the previous owner, Mr. Abernathy, giving a tour of the house he just bought. Everything seems normal. But watch his eyes. Even here, in the beginning, there's a flicker of anxiety he can't quite hide. A sign of the paranoia to come. They skipped ahead a few years. The tapes from 1991 were different. Abernathy was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. He wasn't filming his life anymore. He was filming the house. He'd speak to the camera in a hushed, frantic whisper. "It's in the walls," he'd say. "The shape of the rooms. It's wrong. It hums at night. Can you hear it?" The audio was just static. The final tape was dated October 1992. The footage is nearly unwatchable. The house is dark. Windows are boarded up. Abernathy is crying, begging for it to leave him alone. This tape is the last known recording of Arthur Abernathy. He was reported missing a week after this date. His car was still in the driveway. He simply vanished. He stumbles down into the basement, the one Mark and Sarah are sitting in. He points the camera at a blank section of the cinder block wall. It's not a shadow. It's in there. "It's coming out!" he screams. The camera then drops. The screen shows the concrete floor for a few seconds. There's a sudden jarring sound, a final muffled cry that is abruptly cut off. And then, only static. Just the roar of white noise. A chill ran down Mark's spine. He looked at the wall Abernathy had been pointing at on the screen. It was the same wall that was right behind his wife, not 5 feet away. Mark and Sarah gave the tapes to the police, who reopened the cold case. But they also sent a copy to a forensic audio lab. The lab found something buried in the static of that final tape. It was a voice. Low, guttural, and electronically distorted. When reversed and cleaned up, it seemed to be whispering a single repeated phrase. "My house now. Not all secrets are found inside the house. Sometimes to find them, you have to dig." For one man landscaping his new backyard unearthed a decades-old mystery. David had bought the property for its land. The house was small, but the backyard was a sprawling, untamed wilderness of weeds and thorny bushes. He dreamed of turning it into a tranquil Japanese garden. He started digging for the koi pond near an old, gnarled oak tree. About 3 feet down, his shovel struck something hard with a dull, resonant thud. Not a rock. The sound was too hollow. He cleared the dirt away with his hands. It was a bone, a rib cage to be exact, mostly intact. He assumed it was a large dog or a deer, left by the previous owners. At this point, it's a common, if slightly unsettling, discovery. But David kept digging, and the more he dug, the less sense it made. He found a small, delicate jawbone. The teeth were wrong for any animal he knew. Then he found what looked like long, slender finger bones, and beneath them, a piece of rotted linen cloth. His blood ran cold when his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic. He pulled it from the dirt. It was a silver locket, tarnished black with age. He pried it open. The photos inside had long since decayed into gray mush. This is the point where he called the authorities. However, the official investigation concluded quickly. The report deemed the findings inconclusive, with some suggesting the remains were likely non-human. The case was closed, leaving David with more questions than answers. But David couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The bones, laid out on a tarp in his garage, looked disturbingly human. But the proportions were all slightly off. The arms too long, the skull subtly misshapen. The local paper ran a small story about the strange discovery. A week later, a very old woman from down the street came to his door. She said she knew what he found. She called it the Garden Child. She told him about the woman who lived there in the 40s, a recluse who had a sick child. No one ever saw the child. The child passed away, and the woman buried it in the garden herself. She claimed modern medicine had failed her, but insisted the old ways would bring her back. There are no official records of a child ever living at that address. No birth certificate, no death certificate. It's as if they never existed. David stopped his work on the pond. He says that sometimes, at night, he can hear a faint sound from the backyard coming from the direction of the old oak tree. The sound of a child quietly weeping. Our final story deals with a secret that is both ancient and deeply invasive. A young woman, renovating her dream home, discovered that for over a century, the walls had ears. Chloe was an artist, and the crumbling 19th century brownstone was her canvas. She began the demolition herself, starting with the master bedroom. As she tore down a section of plaster wall, she found a strange cone-shaped object embedded in the lath. It was a primitive listening device, a brass cone acting as a microphone, connected to a long, thin copper tube that snaked away into the darkness of the walls. She thought it was a one-off oddity, maybe part of an old intercom system. But then she found another one in the living room, hidden behind the fireplace mantel, and another in the kitchen. The entire house was wired. The tubes all converged in one place, a small hidden closet behind a bookshelf in the study. A listening post. Someone had been systematically spying on every room in this house. Inside that same closet, under a loose floorboard, Chloe found a stack of leather-bound journals dating back to 1895. They were written by the man who built the house, a scientist named Alistair Finch. Finch wasn't a spy. He was obsessed with a theory he called acoustic residue. He believed that powerful emotional events, a scream of terror, a cry of grief, could leave a permanent echo, an imprint on the physical structure of a room. His journals detailed decades of listening. He documented the arguments of his children, the secret confessions of his wife, all in the hopes of capturing one of these residues. His early entries are clinical, detached. But as the years go on, his scientific curiosity warps into a dangerous obsession. Look at the handwriting. It changes from precise and controlled to a frantic, barely legible scrawl. In his later years, he claims his experiment was a success. He writes about hearing things through his devices when the house is empty. Faint arguments from years past. A baby crying in a nursery that had been empty for a decade. The final page is torn, shoved into the back of the journal. His last entry. It's not an observation, it's a protocol. He writes, "A true residue requires the ultimate emotional imprint. A final, indelible event. The equipment is ready. The final recording starts now." And then, it happens. Every device in the room roars to life at once. Not with faint whispers, but with a single, overwhelming sound. A low, harrowing tone mixed with what sounded like a sharp, sudden intake of breath. It was the sound of a profound final moment, amplified and looped into an eternal echo. The sound isn't just in the room, it's coming from the walls. I can feel it vibrating through the floorboards. The air grows impossibly cold. I scream, but my voice is swallowed by the recording. I'm not just listening to his final moment. I'm becoming part of the playback. The house is listening to me now. It's hungry for a new echo. Sound of a panicked scream, which abruptly cuts off and begins to digitally stutter and loop, mixing with the low, harrowing tone from the recording. New signal acquired. New echo. Recording complete.